when a young nurse named Grace meets Ethan, a boy locked in a silent, unresponsive state. She senses something no one else does, a spark of life waiting to be uncovered. But as she digs deeper, Grace encounters hidden family secrets and forces working against her efforts to help him recover. How far will she go to uncover the truth? And can she bring Ethan back against all odds? Subscribe and hit the bell to join us for this moving story of resilience, hope, and the power of compassion. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you fight for someone's life like Grace does? Let's dive into the story. Grace Thompson stepped up the wide granite steps of the Aldridge estate, clutching the leather strap of her worn brown bag. The afternoon sun glinted off the tall windows, and for a moment she felt the weight of the grandeur pressing down on her. The mansion before her was massive, cold in its elegance, standing in sharp contrast to the small hospital in town where she'd worked for nearly a decade. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of her purpose. She was here to help, and she had been carefully chosen for this job. The front door opened just before she could reach out to knock, and she was greeted by Patrick Aldridge, a man in his late 40s with silver-streaked hair swept back with meticulous care. His sharp eyes softened as he extended a hand. "You must be Grace," he said, his voice warm. "We're grateful you're here." Grace shook his hand, noting his firm grip and a hint of weariness in his gaze. "I'm honored to be here, Mr. Aldridge. I'm ready to do my best for Ethan." Patrick gestured for her to enter, and she stepped into a grand hallway that was quiet and filled with the faint scent of old wood and polished stone. Large oil paintings lined the walls, their somber faces seeming to watch her as she moved forward. Grace couldn't help but feel a chill settle over her as she glanced around. As they walked through the long corridor, Patrick gave her a quick, efficient overview of the mansion and Ethan's condition. "Ethan's room is on the second floor, where he has everything he needs for comfort. We've arranged his care to the best of our abilities." Grace nodded, already feeling the weight of responsibility. She knew that her new patient, Ethan Aldridge, was only 7 years old and had been in a vegetative state for nearly a year following a tragic accident. The details she'd been given were vague, but she knew he was fragile, and his care required meticulous attention. Just as they were nearing a wide staircase that spiraled upward, a figure appeared at the top of the steps, a tall woman with elegantly curled dark hair and a striking yet distant gaze descended toward them. Patrick cleared his throat. "Grace, this is Melanie Aldridge, my wife and Ethan's stepmother." Melanie nodded, her expression calm but cool. "Welcome, Grace. I trust you'll do what's needed to care for Ethan." Grace offered a polite smile, sensing an unspoken tension between Melanie and Patrick. "Thank you, Mrs. Aldridge. I'm here to help in any way I can." "Good," Melanie replied, her tone controlled. "Ethan's care is complex. His condition hasn't changed much, so consistency is crucial." Grace nodded, glancing at Patrick, who looked down as Melanie continued. The atmosphere was thick, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that there was more happening beneath the surface of these polite exchanges. Melanie's eyes lingered on Grace for a moment before she walked away, leaving Patrick and Grace to continue up the stairs. Grace kept silent as they reached the second floor, noting how the rich wallpaper and intricate woodwork added an air of solemnity to the quiet halls. She felt an underlying unease, though she couldn't yet place it. Perhaps it was just the house, a beautiful but imposing place that seemed to harbor secrets. Patrick led Grace into a spacious, softly lit room at the end of the hallway. The room was painted in calming shades of blue and green, with a large window overlooking the garden below. Sunlight filtered in, casting gentle shadows across the room. And there, in a bed surrounded by softly humming machines, lay Ethan Aldridge. Grace took a breath as she approached the bed. Ethan looked small and fragile, almost lost among the medical equipment that monitored every aspect of his life. His skin was pale and his chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic pattern. His eyes were closed, and his face was peaceful, though there was a hint of something unspoken. A sadness, perhaps, that seemed to linger around the corners of his mouth. Patrick stepped forward, his voice soft. "This is Ethan. He hasn't responded to anyone in months. His condition is stable, but as you can see, he requires constant care." Grace nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat as she took in the sight of the boy. She knew the signs of prolonged immobility. His thin frame and the gentle stiffness in his limbs were evidence of his prolonged state. She felt a pang of sympathy for the little boy lying motionless in front of her. "I'll make sure he's as comfortable as possible," she promised, her voice filled with quiet determination. Patrick nodded, his expression grateful but weary. "Thank you, Grace. I'll leave you to get settled." As Patrick left, Grace took a deep breath and approached Ethan. Her fingers gentle as she adjusted his blankets and checked the tubes and wires connected to him. She glanced around the room, noting the small shelves filled with children's books and a toy chest in the corner, carefully arranged but untouched. "Hello, Ethan," she whispered softly, sitting beside him. "I'm Grace. I'm going to be here with you every day." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the machines. Grace felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, mingled with a fierce resolve to give this child the best care she could. The days passed, and Grace settled into a routine, learning every detail of Ethan's care. She was meticulous in her duties, ensuring that his position was adjusted regularly to prevent bed sores, monitoring his vitals, and administering the prescribed medications. As she went about her work, she began to notice subtle signs, moments that made her pause. One evening, as she was adjusting his hand, she thought she saw his fingers twitch. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but she stopped, her breath catching as she waited for it to happen again. "Nothing." She brushed it off, chalking it up to a muscle reflex, but as the days went on, she noticed more subtle movements. An eyelid flicker here, a slight curl of his fingers there. Each time her heart quickened, but she kept her observations to herself, uncertain and unwilling to bring up suspicions without proof. Then one evening, as she was reading by his bedside, she spoke to him, her voice soft. "Ethan, if you can hear me, give me a sign, anything at all." Silence filled the room, and she let out a sigh, turning back to her book. But just as she settled back, she saw it, a small, almost ghostly movement of his fingers. Grace's heart raced as she leaned forward, holding her breath. "Ethan, can you do that again?" she whispered. There was a long pause, and then, slowly, his fingers twitched again. It was enough. Grace felt a surge of hope and determination, her instincts telling her that there was more to Ethan's condition than met the eye. One afternoon, as Grace organized Ethan's medication cabinet, she noticed something odd. Tucked at the very back of the cabinet, behind clearly labeled bottles, was a small, unlabeled vial filled with a clear liquid. Frowning, she turned it over in her hand, wondering why it wasn't labeled like the others. Just as she was examining it, Melanie entered the room. Her eyes immediately fell on the vial in Grace's hand, and for a brief moment, a flicker of something passed over her face. Surprise, or perhaps unease. "Is there something you need, Mrs. Aldridge?" Grace asked, watching her carefully. Melanie's expression shifted back to calm as she approached. "Oh, just checking in on Ethan. Is everything in order?" Grace nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, I was just organizing his medications." Melanie's eyes lingered on the vial for a moment longer before she nodded. "Good. Consistency is important for him." With that, she turned and left, but Grace felt a chill as she pocketed the vial, intending to look into it further. Melanie's reaction was too guarded, too measured, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As the days turned into weeks, Grace's dedication to Ethan grew. She spoke to him daily, her voice filling the quiet room with stories, memories, and little hopes she had for him. She told him about her own childhood, her dreams, and the joy she felt in helping others, even if she couldn't always see the results. One afternoon, as she recounted a story from her nursing days, she noticed his fingers move slightly again, as if responding to her words. Her heart leapt, and she gently covered his hand with hers. "You're not alone, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm here, and I'm going to help you. We're in this together." In that moment, Grace felt an unbreakable bond with the boy. She didn't yet know the secrets of the Aldridge estate, nor the full extent of what she would face. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would fight for Ethan, no matter the cost. Over the next week, Grace continued observing Ethan's responses. She recorded every small movement she saw in him, each eyelid flutter and tiny twitch of his fingers. She noted that these responses were often strongest when she or Ethan's family members, especially his biological mother, spoke to him. These small signs were enough to keep her hopeful, but her unease grew alongside her suspicions. One afternoon, Grace gently squeezed Ethan's hand and spoke to him as she did every day. "I know you're in there, Ethan, and I know you're trying. Don't worry, I'm here with you." As if in response, Ethan's finger curled ever so slightly around hers. Grace's heart leapt. She knew now that Ethan wasn't as unresponsive as others assumed. There was something deeper happening, and she was determined to find out what. The next day, Grace was organizing Ethan's medications when the sound of raised voices echoed down the hallway. She quickly recognized Patrick's voice, but the other, sharp and unwavering, was unfamiliar. Curious, she followed the sounds to the front hall, where she saw Patrick facing a tall woman with wavy dark hair and a fierce expression. It was Charlotte Gray, Ethan's biological mother. Charlotte stood with an air of defiance, her stance unwavering as she faced Patrick and Melanie, who had joined them at the doorway. Grace felt the tension in the air as Charlotte's words cut through the silence. "You should have told me the truth about Ethan's condition sooner," Charlotte said, her voice edged with anger. "I had every right to know. He's my son." Patrick, visibly weary, held up his hands. "Charlotte, we're all doing the best we can here. This isn't about who was told first." Charlotte's eyes blazed as she looked between Patrick and Melanie. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want to be part of Ethan's care. I'm not here to take control, but I deserve to know what's happening to my son." Melanie, who had been watching in silence, finally spoke, her tone cold and dismissive. "You haven't been around in years, Charlotte. Suddenly you're concerned? We've been here through every treatment, every late night and early morning, while you were elsewhere." Charlotte's face flushed with anger, but she kept her voice steady. "I made mistakes, but that doesn't mean I don't care about my son." Grace felt a pang of sympathy for Charlotte. Here was a woman clearly torn between guilt and a fierce desire to protect her child. She admired Charlotte's resilience and saw in her the same deep love for Ethan that she felt herself. As the argument simmered down, Grace retreated, sensing that this conflict would only escalate over time. Over the following days, Charlotte began visiting Ethan more frequently, often sitting beside his bed and softly speaking to him. Grace noticed a subtle change in Ethan's responses whenever Charlotte was present. His breathing would slow, his fingers would twitch more often, and his facial expressions seemed to relax slightly, as if he could feel his mother's presence. Grace made a mental note of these moments, quietly observing Charlotte's interactions with her son. She began to sense an unspoken bond between them, one that had endured despite the time and distance that had separated them. Charlotte often sat quietly, her hand resting gently on Ethan's, whispering stories and memories from when he was younger. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional visit, Charlotte turned to Grace, her eyes red from holding back tears. "Thank you, Grace. I can see that you really care about him." Grace nodded, feeling a kinship with Charlotte that transcended words. "I'm just doing my best to give him the comfort he needs. He's a fighter, I can see that." Charlotte's voice softened. "I only wish I could do more. Sometimes I feel like all I've done is bring him pain." She looked down, visibly struggling with her emotions. Grace placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're here now, and that's what matters. I truly believe he knows you're with him." The two women shared a moment of mutual understanding, united by their dedication to Ethan. It was a quiet but powerful moment, one that solidified their resolve to protect him, no matter the obstacles they might face. As Grace's connection with Ethan deepened, so did her suspicions about Melanie. She noticed Melanie's demeanor change when she spoke of Ethan's progress, or lack thereof. She seemed almost indifferent to any small improvements Ethan showed, focusing instead on maintaining the stability of his condition. Grace found herself wondering if Melanie's interest in Ethan's condition was truly as benign as she claimed. One afternoon, Grace was going through Ethan's medical records when she found an old prescription for a sedative that Ethan had been given shortly after his accident. The dosage seemed unusually high for a child his size, raising red flags in her mind. Just as she was about to record her findings, Melanie entered the room. "Everything all right, Grace?" Melanie asked, her gaze sharp as she noticed the file in Grace's hands. Grace closed the file calmly, giving Melanie a reassuring smile. "Just familiarizing myself with Ethan's treatment plan, Mrs. Aldridge." Melanie's eyes lingered on the file, but she nodded, her voice carefully controlled. "Good. It's important to stick to the routine. Ethan doesn't respond well to sudden changes." As Melanie left, Grace felt a renewed sense of urgency. There was something Melanie wasn't saying, and Grace was determined to find out what it was. Over the next week, Grace's observations grew more intense. She documented every reaction Ethan showed, every slight improvement or response to her voice, determined to prove that he was more aware than his record suggested. She felt a sense of duty, not just as his nurse, but as someone who understood the importance of fighting for the defenseless. One evening, as she sat by Ethan's bedside, she whispered, "Ethan, if you're trying to communicate, I'll help you. Just give me any sign, and I'll know." To her amazement, Ethan's eyelids fluttered, and his fingers twitched gently against her hand. It was the clearest sign she'd seen yet, and her heart filled with hope. She was now more certain than ever that Ethan was fighting to come back. One afternoon, while organizing Ethan's medications, Grace noticed a new vial, unmarked, identical to the one she'd discovered before. She held it up to the light, her pulse quickening as she realized that these vials were not part of Ethan's documented treatment plan. Before she could investigate further, Melanie entered the room, her gaze immediately focusing on the vial in Grace's hand. Her expression hardened, a flash of something unreadable crossing her face. "Grace, is there something you need to discuss with me?" Melanie's tone was sharp, her gaze unyielding. Grace held her ground, placing the vial back in the cabinet. "No, Mrs. Aldridge. I'm just ensuring everything is in order." Melanie's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded, her face once again impassive. "Good. Let's keep it that way. Ethan's care requires careful management." As Melanie left, Grace felt a cold certainty settle over her. She couldn't ignore the strange patterns, the hidden medications, and the guarded look in Melanie's eyes. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but for Ethan's sake, she couldn't turn back now. Unable to shake her suspicions, Grace decided to confide in Dr. Cole Winters, Ethan's longtime doctor. She arranged a meeting with him at his office, bringing along her notes and the unmarked vial. Dr. Winters examined the vial carefully, his face serious. "Grace, this isn't part of Ethan's prescribed treatment. This substance is a mild sedative, enough to keep someone calm, perhaps even suppress natural reflexes." Grace's heart sank as she realized the implications. "So, it's possible someone could be using this to keep Ethan in a state of unresponsiveness?" Dr. Winters nodded slowly, his gaze troubled. "It's not ethical, but yes, if someone wanted Ethan to remain as he is, this could do the trick." Grace clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She couldn't believe that someone would willingly suppress Ethan's progress, keeping him in a state of artificial stillness. With Dr. Winters by her side, she vowed to dig deeper, certain that there was more to this mystery. As Grace delved further into her investigation, her relationship with Charlotte deepened. Charlotte began confiding in her, sharing stories from Ethan's childhood, memories of his bright laughter and curious nature. The bond they shared was not just one of patient and caregiver, but of two women united by their love for a child who needed them. One evening, Charlotte took Grace aside, her voice choked with emotion. "Grace, I feel like I failed him. I should have fought harder. I should have been there more." Grace placed a comforting hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "You're here now, and Ethan knows it. He's still fighting, and he needs us both to keep going." Charlotte nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." In that moment, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just Ethan's nurse. She was his advocate, his protector, and his unwavering ally. Determined to confront the truth, Grace met with Patrick the following day, sharing her findings about the unmarked vials and her suspicions about Melanie's involvement. Patrick listened in shock, his face etched with disbelief. You think Melanie would intentionally suppress Ethan's progress?" Grace met his gaze, her voice steady. "I don't have all the answers, Mr. Aldridge, but I believe Ethan is more aware than we think, and someone is keeping him from showing it." Patrick clenched his fists, a storm of emotions flashing across his face. "I'll look into it, Grace. I promise. Ethan deserves every chance to come back to us." With Patrick's support, Grace felt her resolve solidify. They were now united in their mission to uncover the truth and give Ethan the freedom to recover fully. The following evening, Grace's mind was racing as she reviewed her notes in her quarters. She had collected every tiny detail: the medications, the inconsistencies, and Ethan's small but clear responses. Everything pointed to something deeper, a deliberate act meant to keep him quiet. Around midnight, she heard faint footsteps in the hallway. Curious, she crept to her door and peeked out to see Melanie walking quietly toward Ethan's room. Grace's pulse quickened as she watched Melanie slip inside, her movements purposeful and cautious. Grace decided to follow, staying in the shadows as she moved closer to the slightly ajar door. Inside, she saw Melanie holding a vial, similar to the unlabeled ones she'd found earlier. Melanie's face was calm but intensely focused, her eyes fixed on Ethan's still form. Grace's breath caught as she realized what Melanie was about to do. Without thinking, she stepped forward, making her presence known. "Mrs. Aldridge," Grace said softly, her voice firm but calm. "What are you doing?" Melanie froze, quickly concealing the vial in her pocket. She forced a smile, her voice barely concealing irritation. "Grace, it's late. I was just checking on Ethan." Grace held her ground. "That vial you're holding isn't part of his prescribed treatment, is it?" Melanie's gaze hardened, a flash of anger crossing her face. "You wouldn't understand, Grace. Ethan's condition requires delicate handling. We all want what's best for him, don't we?" Grace felt a surge of protectiveness. "I do want what's best for him, Mrs. Aldridge, and that's why I'm here. Ethan deserves the chance to recover, and he's showing signs of awareness. Why would we suppress that?" Melanie's face went pale, and for a brief moment, Grace saw the crack in her composure. "Sometimes, keeping things stable is the only way to maintain peace in this family," she murmured before brushing past Grace and leaving the room. Grace watched her go, feeling both a sense of relief and dread. Melanie's words echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder that there was more at stake than just Ethan's recovery. This was about power, control, and secrets that Melanie was willing to protect at any cost. Determined to uncover the truth, Grace met with Dr. Cole Winters the next day. She presented him with the vials she had collected, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Dr. Winters, I believe these sedatives are being used to suppress Ethan's responsiveness. His small reactions and moments of awareness are real, and I'm afraid they're being deliberately kept in check." Dr. Winters frowned, examining the vials with a grave expression. "Grace, these are strong sedatives, enough to keep a person in a state of complete docility. They're not appropriate for a child like Ethan, and certainly not without medical justification." Grace's heart pounded as Dr. Winters agreed to run a full analysis. Days later, the results confirmed her worst fears. The sedatives in Ethan's bloodstream were consistent with the dosage levels found in the vials. It was now clear that someone had been keeping Ethan in a state of suspended awareness, preventing him from making any progress. Dr. Winters looked at Grace, his voice heavy. "Grace, I'll support your findings. This is highly irregular, and it's not in Ethan's best interest. But we must proceed carefully. This involves more than just medical ethics. There may be legal implications here." Grace nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Dr. Winters. I just want to give Ethan the chance he deserves." Just as Grace and Dr. Winters prepared to confront Patrick with their findings, Ethan's health took a drastic turn. Late one evening, Grace was sitting by his side, reading softly to him, when the monitors began to blare. His heart rate spiked, and his breathing grew shallow and uneven. "Ethan!" Grace cried, immediately pressing the call button for emergency assistance. Nurses and doctors rushed into the room, moving quickly as they worked to stabilize him. Grace's hands shook as she observed the medical team, fear clawing at her heart. Dr. Winters entered moments later, his face grim as he examined the monitor. "His system may be reacting to the reduction in sedatives," he said, his tone controlled. "His body is struggling to adjust." Patrick and Charlotte appeared at the doorway, their faces pale with worry. Charlotte moved to Grace's side, gripping her arm as tears filled her eyes. Is he going to be okay? Grace squeezed Charlotte's hand, her own fear evident. He's strong. I believe he'll fight through this. For hours they waited, each passing minute filled with a mix of hope and dread. Finally, the doctors managed to stabilize Ethan, his breathing returning to a steady rhythm. But the incident had left its mark, reminding them all of the fragile line Ethan walked between life and death. The morning after Ethan's crisis, Grace requested a private meeting with Patrick. She sat across from him in his study, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she prepared to share her findings. "Mr. Aldridge," she began, her voice steady, "there's something important I need to tell you. I've been monitoring Ethan's responses, and I believe he's more aware than we thought. But there's more. I found evidence that sedatives were being administered to keep him unresponsive." Patrick's face went pale, his eyes widening in shock. What are you saying, Grace? Who would do that?" Grace took a deep breath, knowing the next part would be difficult. "I suspect Melanie may be involved. I've seen her with these vials, and her reaction when I confronted her was unsettling." Patrick's expression shifted from disbelief to anger, his hands clenched tightly. "You're telling me that my own wife, that she might be doing this to my son?" Grace placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I know it's hard to believe, but I have Dr. Winter's support, and we both believe that if we give Ethan a chance, he could show more signs of recovery." Patrick's voice shook as he processed her words. "I always trusted Melanie to do what was best for Ethan. But if there's even a chance that she's been holding him back, I can't ignore this." They sat in silence, a shared understanding settling between them. Patrick's heart was heavy, but his resolve had never been stronger. He would protect his son, no matter what it took. Patrick wasted no time in confronting Melanie. He found her in the garden that afternoon, her face calm as she enjoyed a cup of tea. But her expression darkened when she saw the determined look in his eyes. "Melanie," Patrick said, his voice hard, "we need to talk. I know about the sedatives." Melanie's face went pale, but she quickly composed herself, her expression cool and unrepentant. "Patrick, you don't understand. I did what was necessary to keep this family together. Ethan's condition, it's best managed with stability." Patrick's fists clenched as anger flared within him. "Stability? You call suppressing my son's awareness stability? He deserves the chance to recover, and you've been keeping that from him." Melanie's eyes narrowed, a flash of desperation crossing her face. "I was protecting us, Patrick. If Ethan started showing signs of improvement, it would have disrupted everything. We've built a life, a stable, structured life. And you know how delicate our family's image is." Patrick took a step back, his voice filled with disbelief. "This isn't about image or stability, Melanie. This is about my son, and you've betrayed him. And me." Melanie's composure finally broke, her voice trembling with anger. "Fine. If you want to throw away everything we've worked for, go ahead. But don't expect me to stand by and watch." With that, she stormed off, leaving Patrick standing alone in the garden, his heart torn between anger and sorrow. That night, as Grace sat by Ethan's side, she whispered to him, her voice filled with hope and determination. "Ethan, if you can hear me, know that you're safe now. Patrick and we're fighting for you. You don't have to be afraid anymore." To her astonishment, Ethan's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment he opened his eyes. Grace's breath caught as she met his gaze, a spark of awareness shining through his exhaustion. "Ethan?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Can you hear me?" His lips parted slightly, and though his voice was barely audible, he managed to whisper a single word. "Help." Grace's heart swelled with relief and joy. She gently squeezed his hand, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm here, Ethan. We're all here. You're safe." Ethan's brief moment of clarity filled Grace, Patrick, and Charlotte with renewed hope. They now had proof that Ethan was capable of awareness, and they were determined to give him every opportunity to recover fully. Dr. Winters adjusted Ethan's treatment plan, carefully reducing any unnecessary sedatives and introducing physical therapy to help his muscles regain strength. Charlotte spent hours by Ethan's side, reading to him, singing softly, and sharing memories. Patrick joined her, and the two found solace in each other's presence. Their shared dedication to Ethan bringing them closer than they had been in years. Grace watched as the family began to heal, each member reconnecting with Ethan in their own way. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her persistence had given Ethan the chance he deserved. Realizing her control was slipping, Melanie packed her belongings and left the estate. She left a terse note for Patrick, claiming that she had only done what she believed was best, and accusing him of choosing Ethan's recovery over the stability of their family. Her departure was swift, and though her presence had left scars, her absence brought a sense of peace and relief to the household. With Melanie gone, Grace, Patrick, and Charlotte focused entirely on Ethan's recovery. Every day brought small but significant improvements. Ethan's responses grew stronger, his eyes opening more frequently, and his fingers gripping Grace's hand with more purpose. For the first time, the family could envision a future where Ethan would return to them fully. And as they sat together in his room, united by love and hope, they felt a sense of gratitude for the strength that had carried them through. With Melanie's departure and the changes to Ethan's treatment plan, Grace noticed subtle but hopeful signs of improvement. She took note of each small reaction, from the strengthening grip of his hand to the slight movement in his arms. Patrick and Charlotte began to visit regularly, both parents transformed by the possibility that Ethan could return to them fully. One afternoon, as Grace adjusted Ethan's position on the bed, she noticed his eyes slowly opening. Her heart soared as he looked directly at her, recognition flickering in his gaze. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet awe. "Can you see me?" He blinked, his fingers curling around hers in response. It was the strongest reaction she'd seen yet, and she felt a surge of hope well up within her. Gently she spoke to him, encouraging him to keep fighting, to hold on to his strength. His eyes closed after a moment, but the spark of awareness lingered. For Grace, this moment was everything. It was a promise that, despite the challenges ahead, Ethan was on the road to recovery. Over the next week, Patrick and Charlotte spent long hours by Ethan's bedside, sometimes in silence, sometimes reminiscing about his early childhood. Their shared moments became opportunities for healing, as they recognized how deeply they both loved their son. The unresolved issues between them gradually gave way to a quiet understanding, a partnership rooted in their mutual desire for Ethan's well-being. One evening, as they sat in the garden while Grace tended to Ethan, Patrick turned to Charlotte, his voice soft. "Thank you for being here. I know I haven't always made things easy." Charlotte looked at him, her gaze gentle. "We both made mistakes, Patrick, but Ethan's brought us back together in a way I never thought possible." They shared a look filled with warmth and understanding. It wasn't a rekindling of their marriage, but rather a mutual respect and appreciation. A rekindling of the friendship they had once shared. One night, after Patrick and Charlotte had gone home, Grace decided to stay by Ethan's side, feeling the weight of her dedication to him. The hospital room was quiet, the soft hum of monitors filling the air as she watched over him, her heart brimming with hope and worry. As she sat by his bed, her hand resting over his, she whispered, "Ethan, you've been so brave. You've shown me what it means to fight for something, someone you care about. You're a warrior, and I'm so proud of you." In the stillness of the night, she felt his fingers move slightly, as if acknowledging her words. She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She made a silent promise to stay by his side, no matter what the future held. Just when it seemed like Ethan's progress was steady, Grace noticed something troubling. During a routine check, his breathing became shallow, his pulse irregular. Alarms blared, and within moments, doctors and nurses rushed into the room, working swiftly to stabilize him. Grace's heart pounded as she stepped back, her eyes fixed on Ethan, fear gripping her. Dr. Winters arrived quickly, assessing Ethan's condition with grave concern. "His body is still adjusting to the changes in treatment," he explained. "We may need to take it slower to allow him to stabilize fully." Patrick and Charlotte arrived shortly afterward, visibly shaken. Charlotte clutched Grace's hand, her voice trembling. Will he be okay?" Grace nodded, doing her best to reassure Charlotte and Patrick. "Ethan's strong. We've seen him fight before. I believe he'll pull through this too." The next few hours were tense, but eventually Ethan's breathing steadied. The doctors left, satisfied that he was stable, though they advised proceeding with caution in the coming days. As relief washed over them, Patrick turned to Grace, his voice choked. "Thank you. You've done more for him and for us than we could ever repay." Grace shook her head, smiling through her own tears. "This is what I was meant to do." Several days later, as Ethan lay in bed, Grace decided to try a few basic speech and movement exercises with him. She gently moved his fingers, encouraging him to follow her lead. At first he remained still, but then, slowly, he began to move his fingers in response to her guidance. "Good, Ethan," she praised softly. "You're doing amazing." Encouraged, she continued the exercises, watching as he put in the effort to respond. Each small success felt monumental, a testament to his resilience and determination. She knew these moments, though simple, were crucial in building his confidence and strength. Then, as she spoke to him, she noticed his eyes flutter open again, this time with a clarity she hadn't seen before. He looked at her, then at his parents, who had just entered the room. He managed to whisper a faint, raspy, "Mom!" Charlotte gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She rushed to his side, taking his hand. "Ethan, oh my sweet boy." Patrick stood close by, his eyes brimming with emotion as he placed a comforting hand on Charlotte's shoulder. They shared a look of profound gratitude and relief, the weight of their long journey lifting, even if only slightly. Watching Ethan's progress had changed something in Grace. She had always been dedicated to her work, but this experience had given her a new perspective. She realized that her role went beyond caregiving. She was an advocate, a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. One evening, as she shared her thoughts with Dr. Winters, he listened intently, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Grace, have you ever considered expanding your role? There are many children like Ethan who could benefit from someone with your dedication and compassion." Grace smiled, the idea sparking a sense of purpose within her. "I think I'd like that, Dr. Winters. I want to make a difference beyond just one family." Dr. Winters nodded, clearly proud of her. "You already have, Grace, but I have no doubt that your work is just beginning." With Ethan's progress becoming more consistent, Patrick and Charlotte decided to organize a small celebration for his continued recovery. Close friends and family gathered at the estate, filling the once quiet rooms with laughter and love. Grace joined them, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment as she watched Ethan interact with those around him. As the day went on, Patrick raised a glass, his voice filled with emotion. "Today, we celebrate Ethan's courage and resilience, and we honor Grace, who has shown us what true dedication looks like. To Ethan, and to the people who never gave up on him." Everyone raised their glasses, their cheers filling the room. Grace blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her as she looked around at the faces of those she had come to care for deeply. This family, once fractured and distant, had come together in ways she never could have imagined. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan called Grace over, surprising her with a small gift wrapped in bright paper. He handed it to her with a shy smile. Inside she found a drawing he had made, a simple but touching image of himself, his parents, and Grace, all holding hands under a bright blue sky. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked at the drawing, her heart full. "Thank you, Ethan. This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Ethan grinned, his eyes filled with gratitude and affection. He hugged her tightly, and she returned the embrace, knowing that this moment was the culmination of everything she had worked for. In the days that followed, Grace began preparing to take on her new role as an advocate for patient safety and recovery. With Dr. Winters' support, she planned to share Ethan's story with other medical professionals, raising awareness about the importance of vigilance and compassion in patient care. Ethan continued to make progress, his strength and energy growing each day. His laughter filled the estate, bringing light to every corner. His parents, now bonded by a shared purpose, found joy in watching him thrive. Their once strained relationship transformed into a respectful partnership. As she prepared for her departure from the estate, Grace knew that her connection to Ethan and his family would never fade. She had found a place in their lives, and they in hers. She had become part of a story of healing and hope, a story that would inspire her work for years to come. As the weeks passed, Ethan's physical recovery continued, but he began to experience difficulties with speech and coordination. Though his progress had been steady, there were days when he grew frustrated with his limitations, and his patience wore thin. Grace, Patrick, and Charlotte could see the determination in his eyes as he pushed himself, but they also sensed his exhaustion. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging therapy session, Ethan looked at Grace, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and longing. "I want to be like before," he whispered, his voice shaky. Grace knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're doing amazing, Ethan. Healing takes time, but you're getting stronger every day." Patrick and Charlotte, who had been observing nearby, exchanged a look of mutual concern. It was clear that Ethan's journey would require not just physical strength, but emotional resilience as well. Determined to help him stay motivated, they committed to supporting him through each high and low. Grace's new role as an advocate for patient safety quickly gained traction, and she found herself invited to speak at a conference for healthcare professionals. As she prepared her presentation, she felt a sense of purpose mingled with trepidation. She planned to share Ethan's story, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, ethical practices, and compassion in patient care. At the conference, she recounted the journey with Ethan, from her initial discovery of his awareness to the challenges his family faced. The audience listened intently, visibly moved by the story of resilience and hope. Grace concluded with a heartfelt message. Every patient deserves a voice, especially those who cannot speak for themselves. We, as caregivers, have the power to make a difference in their lives. We must be their advocates, their protectors, and above all, their allies in healing. Her words were met with applause, and she left the stage feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. As she descended, several colleagues approached her, eager to learn more and to implement the principles she had shared in their own practices. Back at the estate, Ethan's emotional struggles grew more apparent. Though he was steadily improving, he often grew discouraged, especially when he struggled to communicate or to regain his full range of motion. His parents remained supportive, but Patrick, in particular, sensed his son's inner turmoil and found himself reflecting on their past relationship. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Patrick gently took Ethan's hand. "You're doing incredible, Ethan," he said softly. "But you don't have to be perfect. I love you just as you are, and I'm proud of you every day." Ethan looked at his father, his expression softening. "It's hard," he admitted, his voice filled with vulnerability. Patrick squeezed his hand. "I know, but we're all here with you. And remember, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." For Patrick, this conversation was a turning point. He recognized that his son's journey was about more than physical recovery. It was about nurturing Ethan's spirit and helping him feel whole again. The weight of their bond filled him with a renewed sense of commitment and gratitude. With the family growing closer each day, Charlotte and Patrick found themselves spending more time together, supporting Ethan and coordinating his care. Their once tense relationship softened, evolving into a deep friendship rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. They often shared stories of Ethan's early years, memories that brought laughter and tears, bridging the gap between them. One evening, as they sat in the living room while Ethan slept, Charlotte looked over at Patrick, a gentle smile on her face. "Thank you, Patrick, for standing by Ethan and for standing by me. I never thought we'd find our way back to this." Patrick returned her smile, his voice warm. "Neither did I. But I think we both needed this chance to heal, for Ethan's sake and for our own." Their friendship had come full circle, built on forgiveness and understanding. Together, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead, united in their dedication to Ethan's well-being. While Ethan's progress at home continued, Grace encountered a setback in her advocacy work. After her presentation at the conference, she received a call from a legal representative warning her that some of her statements about patient mistreatment could expose her to liability. It was an unexpected challenge that left her feeling vulnerable, questioning whether she had overstepped. Determined to protect her credibility and her message, Grace sought out legal guidance, working with a lawyer to ensure her advocacy remained ethical and within legal bounds. Though she felt a renewed sense of caution, She was undeterred in her mission to promote ethical patient care. Her experience with Ethan had taught her the importance of integrity, and she resolved to continue her work, stronger and wiser. She knew that her voice, and the voices of her patients, deserved to be heard. With his parents' and Grace's support, Ethan's spirit began to recover. One afternoon, during a therapy session in the estate's garden, he surprised everyone by standing on his own for the first time. Grace, Charlotte, and Patrick watched in awe as he took a few hesitant steps, his face lighting up with joy and determination. The moment was filled with an overwhelming sense of triumph. Patrick and Charlotte clapped, cheering him on, while Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes, moved by Ethan's resilience. She captured the moment in her mind, knowing that it symbolized the culmination of all they had worked for. "You did it, Ethan!" Charlotte exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. "You're a hero!" Ethan beamed, the pride in his eyes a testament to his strength. He had faced unimaginable challenges, and now, with each step, he was reclaiming his life. As Ethan's recovery grew stronger, Grace prepared to take on a new advocacy role that would take her to other hospitals across the region. She knew it was time to leave the Aldridge family and continue her mission, but the thought of saying goodbye was bittersweet. The night before her departure, Patrick and Charlotte organized a farewell dinner for her. Friends and family gathered to celebrate Grace's dedication, filling the estate with warmth and gratitude. Ethan presented her with a framed photograph of the family, his handwriting carefully inscribed on the back. "Thank you for believing in me." As she hugged each of them goodbye, Grace felt the depth of the bond they shared, a connection forged through adversity and strengthened by love. "Thank you all," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever repay. Ethan, you'll always be in my heart." With a final embrace, Grace departed, leaving behind a legacy of compassion and courage. She carried their journey with her, a reminder of the resilience and hope she had witnessed. Grace's work as a patient advocate blossomed in the years that followed. She traveled across the country, sharing her experiences and insights, implementing programs to safeguard vulnerable patients, and to ensure that medical care was administered with compassion and accountability. She became a respected figure in healthcare, inspiring countless caregivers and families alike. Her advocacy, built on the foundation of her journey with Ethan, transformed lives and elevated the standards of patient care. Her story served as a powerful reminder that every patient, no matter their condition, deserved respect and a voice in their own care. Back at the estate, Patrick, Charlotte, and Ethan settled into a peaceful rhythm. Their lives had been irrevocably changed, each moment reminding them of the precious gift of family and resilience. Ethan thrived, his health and spirit stronger than ever, his laughter filling the estate with joy and hope. Patrick and Charlotte, though no longer together, had forged a bond that transcended past conflicts, co-parenting with a sense of partnership and mutual respect. Their love for Ethan united them, and they were committed to providing him with the happy and stable life he deserved. Years later, Grace returned to the Aldridge estate for a surprise visit. Ethan, now a teenager, greeted her with a grin, proudly showing her his latest accomplishments: soccer trophies, art projects, and academic awards. His life was vibrant and full, a testament to his resilience and the unwavering support of his family. As they walked through the garden, Grace marveled at the young man he had become. She felt a profound sense of pride, knowing that she had played a part in his journey. "You've come so far, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I always knew you'd make it." Ethan looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Grace, for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." They shared a quiet moment of understanding, a bond that transcended words. For both of them, this journey had been transformative, filled with lessons of resilience, hope, and the power of compassion. Following her reunion with Ethan and his family, Grace returned to her advocacy work with a renewed sense of purpose. She had left an indelible mark on the Aldridge family, and now her mission was to extend that impact to others. Her work took her across the country, where she educated medical staff, gave seminars, and developed programs aimed at protecting vulnerable patients. In her speeches, she often shared Ethan's story, describing his resilience and the love of a family that helped bring him back. Ethan became a symbol in her presentations, a testament to the strength of those who fight even when they cannot speak for themselves. Grace's influence grew, and she felt fulfillment in knowing that each step forward honored the journey she had shared with him. One day, as she prepared for a presentation in a packed auditorium, she looked out over the audience, feeling a deep sense of pride. Ethan's story was now a beacon of hope, a reminder of the critical importance of empathy, ethics, and unwavering dedication in healthcare. Back at the Aldridge estate, Ethan continued to flourish. He excelled in school, joined the soccer team, and began expressing an interest in art, a talent that both Patrick and Charlotte nurtured with enthusiasm. His recovery had given him a sense of purpose, and he channeled his energy into each new endeavor with excitement and resilience. One evening, as he shared a new sketch with his parents, Charlotte felt a surge of pride. She marveled at how far he had come, reflecting on the journey that had once seemed so uncertain. "You're so talented, Ethan," she said, pulling him into a hug. "And brave. I'm incredibly proud of you." Patrick nodded, his gaze filled with warmth. "Your mom's right. You're one in a million." Ethan smiled, glancing between them. "I'm lucky to have both of you." For Patrick and Charlotte, these moments with Ethan brought a profound sense of peace. They knew that, despite the challenges they had faced, they had created a family built on love, understanding, and resilience. Grace maintained regular contact with the Aldridge family, visiting the estate whenever she was able. Each visit filled her with joy as she witnessed Ethan's continued progress and the peace that had settled over the household. She felt like part of the family, a connection that had deepened with time. On one of her visits, Patrick took her aside, expressing his gratitude. "Grace, I can't thank you enough. You brought us together in ways we didn't even know we needed." Grace smiled, deeply moved. "Ethan brought us all together, Patrick. He was the one who taught me the importance of hope and perseverance." Patrick nodded, and they stood in shared understanding, grateful for the journey they had traveled together. Several years later, Grace received an invitation from the Aldridge family for a special celebration at the estate. Upon arriving, she discovered that they had arranged a small ceremony to honor her for her dedication. With Ethan presenting her with a plaque of appreciation on behalf of the family, Ethan spoke in front of friends and family, his voice filled with gratitude. "Grace, you changed my life. You believed in me when no one else could see what was happening inside. You gave me my future back, and for that, I'll always be thankful." Grace blinked back tears as she accepted the plaque, overwhelmed by the love and respect she felt from the family and friends gathered around her. It was a moment of closure, a celebration of the journey they had all shared. In the years that followed, Grace's advocacy work continued to influence patient care nationwide. Hospitals began adopting protocols she had developed, prioritizing patient communication, ethical caregiving, and family-centered support systems. Grace received numerous awards, but her greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her work was protecting others like Ethan. Ethan's journey became a legacy in its own right. He often shared his story, speaking at his school and local events, reminding others of the importance of resilience and the value of family. His life became a tribute to the countless individuals who had supported him, from his family to Grace and the medical staff who had fought for him. Years after his recovery, Ethan graduated high school with honors, a momentous occasion that brought friends, family, and Grace together once more. As they gathered at the estate to celebrate, Charlotte and Patrick reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Their friendship had become a cornerstone of their family life, united by their shared love for Ethan. Patrick raised a toast, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "To Ethan, whose strength and determination remind us every day of the power of love and hope, and to Grace, who gave us the courage to believe in miracles." Glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air as they celebrated the milestones they had achieved together. In that moment, they knew that their family was whole, strengthened by the challenges they had overcome and the bonds they had forged. One summer afternoon, Grace visited the estate for a quiet gathering. As she sat on the porch with Patrick, Charlotte, and Ethan, she felt a deep sense of peace. The garden was in full bloom, the air filled with laughter as Ethan played soccer with his friends nearby. Watching him, Grace felt a profound gratitude for the journey they had shared. She knew that her time with the Aldridge family had been transformative, both for them and for herself. Through their trials, she had found her calling, and they had found a renewed sense of purpose and love. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the estate, Grace smiled, content. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that, together, they could face anything. In that perfect moment, Grace, Patrick, Charlotte, and Ethan sat side by side, their hearts filled with gratitude, hope, and the joy of a shared journey. They had learned that family was more than just a bond. It was a commitment to love, support, and cherish each other, no matter what. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they looked to the future with optimism, their lives forever intertwined by the strength and resilience they had discovered in each other. Years later, Grace's work as an advocate continued to inspire change. The protocols she helped establish had become standard in hospitals nationwide, protecting countless patients and ensuring that their voices were heard. Her journey with Ethan had sparked a movement, one that honored the dignity and resilience of every patient. Ethan, now a young adult, went on to pursue studies in healthcare, inspired by Grace's work and the compassion he had experienced. He remained close to his parents and to Grace, grateful for the second chance they had given him. Their story became a lasting legacy, a reminder that love and compassion have the power to heal, transform, and unite. And as they moved forward, each of them carried with them the lessons they had learned, knowing that they had created something beautiful and enduring from their journey together. A few years after Ethan's full recovery, Grace was formally invited to deliver a keynote address at a national healthcare conference. Her reputation as a patient advocate had grown, drawing attention to her work in hospitals and medical institutions. This time she wasn't alone. Ethan, now a college freshman studying healthcare administration, joined her on stage. The room filled with hundreds of healthcare professionals, administrators, and caregivers, all gathered to hear their story. As Grace introduced Ethan, she felt a profound sense of pride, knowing he was as committed to patient advocacy as she was. Ethan took a deep breath before addressing the audience. "When I was a child, I lost my voice and, for a time, lost hope. But it was because of Grace, and my family, that I was able to find my way back. Today, I want to ensure that no other child feels unheard or left behind." The audience erupted in applause, moved by his story and inspired by his courage. Together, Grace and Ethan shared their vision for a healthcare system where patients of all ages, especially those in vulnerable conditions, would be heard, valued, and protected. Their joint mission gained momentum, sparking conversations across hospitals and healthcare institutions nationwide. They quickly became known as a duo, whose message reached beyond policy and into the hearts of their listeners. After the conference, Grace and Ethan were approached by a healthcare foundation interested in funding an advocacy organization in their name. The initiative would promote training for caregivers, policy changes for patient oversight, and resources for families navigating complex medical conditions. Together, they founded the Aldridge Initiative, an organization dedicated to patient-centered care. Ethan spearheaded outreach efforts, drawing on his personal experience and connections in the healthcare world to advocate for change. Grace focused on caregiver training, developing programs that taught medical staff to recognize subtle signs of awareness in patients who couldn't communicate traditionally. One of their first projects was a patient's voice hotline, which allowed family members and caregivers to report concerns anonymously, ensuring that issues in patient care would not go unheard. The hotline was widely praised for empowering families and making it easier to bring attention to cases that needed a second look. The success of the Aldridge Initiative marked the beginning of a movement that inspired both patients and caregivers alike, providing a lifeline to those who had felt invisible or overlooked. As the Aldridge Initiative grew, Grace and Ethan began traveling across the country, holding workshops for medical professionals, students, and family caregivers. At each stop, they shared the story of Ethan's recovery, using it to illustrate the transformative power of compassion and vigilance in healthcare. During one workshop, a young nurse approached Grace with tears in her eyes. "Your story," It made me realize I've been afraid to speak up about things I've seen at my own hospital. But now, I feel like I have a responsibility to my patients to be their advocate, just like you were for Ethan." Grace placed a comforting hand on the young nurse's shoulder, her voice filled with reassurance. "Every time you speak up for a patient, you're making a difference. Trust yourself, and always put their well-being first." Their workshops didn't just educate, they empowered healthcare workers and families to act with integrity and courage. Over time, the Aldridge Initiative inspired numerous success stories, each one a testament to the profound impact of Grace and Ethan's work. As their advocacy continued, Grace and Ethan lobbied for policy changes that would legally require healthcare facilities to implement safeguards against patient mistreatment and neglect. They worked tirelessly with lawmakers, providing testimonies about Ethan's experience and sharing stories of other patients who had benefited from improved patient care. Their efforts culminated in the passage of the Patient Dignity Act, a federal law mandating regular evaluations of patient conditions in long-term care facilities and greater accountability for caregivers. Facilities were now required to train staff to recognize signs of awareness in unresponsive patients and to document any progress accurately, ensuring patients like Ethan wouldn't be overlooked. This victory marked a milestone for the Aldridge Initiative. Grace and Ethan's work had become more than an advocacy journey. It had changed the landscape of patient rights and care standards across the nation. Inspired by Grace and his own journey, Ethan eventually shifted his studies from healthcare administration to neuroscience, driven by a desire to understand the brain and help those in similar conditions. He hoped to become a researcher dedicated to exploring treatments for patients in prolonged, unresponsive states. In a heartfelt conversation with Grace, he shared his dream. "I want to make sure that every patient has a voice, even if they can't speak. If I can find new ways to help patients communicate, or even create new treatments, maybe we can give hope to families like mine who are waiting for signs of life." Grace's heart swelled with pride as she listened. "You're going to change lives, Ethan. You already have, and no matter where you go, I'll always be here cheering you on." Their partnership, once one of caregiver and patient, had evolved into a shared mission, with both carrying on the legacy of the Aldridge Initiative. One of the most impactful aspects of their work was the outreach program for families of patients in prolonged care. Grace and Ethan provided resources for parents, siblings, and caregivers, helping them understand how to recognize signs of awareness, advocate for their loved ones, and navigate the emotional toll of waiting for recovery. They hosted a live-streamed forum where families could ask questions and share their experiences. The response was overwhelming, with thousands tuning in, grateful for a safe space to share stories and learn from others who understood their struggles. During one session, a mother tearfully expressed her gratitude. "You've given me hope, Grace and Ethan. My daughter hasn't responded in months, but now I feel like there's something I can do for her. I'm so thankful for this community you've created." Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose hearing these words. She knew the pain of waiting, and now she could offer others the same support and guidance that had carried her through her journey with Ethan. Years later, as the Aldridge Initiative celebrated its 10th anniversary, Grace and Ethan stood together on stage at the annual gala. The organization had grown beyond their wildest dreams, with programs in every state and a network of healthcare advocates across the country. As they looked out over the audience, filled with families, caregivers, and professionals who had been touched by their work, Grace felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their journey had come full circle, and together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of despair. Ethan leaned toward Grace, his voice soft. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Grace smiled, her heart full. "We did this together, Ethan, and I'm so proud of the person you've become." With that, they took each other's hands, united by a bond that had been forged through hardship, hope, and an unwavering belief in the power of compassion. Their legacy would continue to inspire and protect countless lives, a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the lasting impact of love and resilience. Today, the Aldridge Initiative stands as one of the leading patient advocacy organizations in the country, a symbol of hope and change. Grace and Ethan's story serves as a powerful reminder that one person's compassion can spark a movement. and that the smallest signs of life, like the gentle twitch of a finger or the flicker of an eyelid, can lead to monumental change. Grace's unwavering dedication, coupled with Ethan's courage, built an enduring legacy, proving that even in the most challenging circumstances, there is always room for hope, resilience, and love. Together, they had transformed a single act of advocacy into a movement that would change lives for generations to come. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Grace and Ethan's story shows how courage, love, and resilience can make a real difference. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales of triumph, compassion, and the power of human connection, don't forget to subscribe. Click the subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you won't miss any future stories. We're excited to bring you more heartwarming narratives that show the strength of the human spirit. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.